Hello everyone and welcome to AIHR Live. I'm Eric van Vulpen and I'm here with Hannah Spell. Hi Hannah, how are you?
Hi, Eric. Doing well.
Fantastic, fantastic. We have this interview because you wrote a book, or you co-authored a book titled Predicting Business Success. I'm
Mhm.
going to ask about the title of the book later, because it's a book about people analytics, but it doesn't have people analytics in the name. That's my second question. My first question is, can you please introduce yourself and tell us something more about you and your background?
Sure, absolutely. So, Hannah Spell, I am the Director of Research and Analytics for a consulting company called Strategic Management Decisions, or SMD. I did co-author the book, as you mentioned, with two of our co-founders of SMD and one of my peers, Matt Betts. I have a PhD in industrial organizational psychology, and I use that background in all the work I do with SMD.
Fantastic. So how did you get involved in people analytics?
Well, with my educational background in IO psychology, people analytics really are the root of that. It hasn't always been called people analytics. I think that's kind of the new sexy term for it. When I was in school, it was just academia and research. But when I was in school, I knew I didn't want to go into academics. I wanted to be out there applying what I knew to real world scenarios. And so nowadays, that is people analytics. It's using statistical methods for the behavioral sciences, which is what IO psychology is, and applying that to scenarios in the real world using real data so you can understand those connections between the human side of business and those business outcomes and metrics that we always are focused on driving as organizations.
Yeah, and that's also the title of the book, of course, Predicting Business Success. Now,
Yes.
and I've been guilty of this in the age of people analytics, HR analytics being very popular. You didn't decide to title your book People Analytics, like some of the others have done in the past few months. You titled it Predicting Business Success. Why did you go for that specific title?
Well, I think, the thought behind that is one, this is our third book. So our others do kind of have that title of HR analytics in them. And we really felt like the industry is pushing in a way that we wanted folks to think differently. So, as an HR leader, you're not just managing talent, but really understanding how you can play a role in the business success by how you manage that talent and how you understand it. Obviously, people analytics is what the book is about, and that is how you do predict business success and drive it. But I think it's interesting to have an HR book. We're published by SHRM, so we're an HR organization is publishing our book. That is obviously the focus. But when you title it Predicting Business Success, it kind of changes the narrative right out of the gate for folks that we're not just understanding how to do a better job of managing people, but managing people in a strategic way to help organizations be successful.
Yeah. So, while writing the book, what was the most surprising finding that you found?
I don't know if this is an answer just specific to writing the book, but I would say the book is kind of a genesis of the work that we do with our clients and the research that we put out using our data. But I think some of the things that are a little surprising is a little bit of a contradiction that I think I see in this space right now, in that analytics and using statistical methods and predictive models, the interest in that is growing exponentially. I mean, the space is getting really crowded with vendors saying that they are doing this, publications and the HR, things like you guys coming out and focusing heavily on the analytics. I think is contradicted with the speed at which organizations are actually implementing this stuff and really using it on a day-to-day basis. So the interest has skyrocketed, but we see very often, even with our clients, HR really kind of having an uphill battle and changing the focus of how the rest of the organization views HR and taking that seat at the table by demonstrating your value, using data more effectively, and getting analytics as part of kind of the status quo in the HR space. So the interest is there. I think we still have some work to do to get to where it is common practice in organizations.
Yeah, that's a very, very interesting comment. So why do you think this misbalance exists? Because we're seeing the exact same. We're seeing a lot of visitors, a lot of traffic, and it just keeps growing. The number of vendors, it's skyrocketing, just like you're saying. but the speed of change, the rate of change in organizations, it's still, they're running into the same problems as they did 2 years ago.
Yeah. I think organizational change is hard in general. You have to change the mindset. You have to change the processes. You may need different resources. There's a lot of things that have to go into place to really any change. And I don't think analytics and the approach to your work is any different. But I also think that some of this stuff is really complex. And sometimes you do need someone with a certain kind of background and knowledge to help tell the story, to do it appropriately, and to make sure that you are kind of closing the loop on it. So I see a lot of interest in analytics without sort of the wrap up of demonstrating the value of what you did with the analytics project, showing true ROI, putting dollars to HR things that you now can do. So I think there's a variety of factors that are not necessarily roadblocks, but maybe hurdles or speed bumps along the way that I think go with a lot of other types of organizational change. And you're seeing it applying to the HR space as well when it comes to putting analytics in place.
So I want to dive slightly deeper into this misbalance, because the problem that we're still, when an organization, for example, is approaching us, and it's probably the same for you, it's still very much when they approach me, and they ask me to talk about predictive analytics, I assume that they, if they have the metrics, if they understand the metrics well and are measuring the 3 or 4 metrics that really matter, they're already way further than the average organization. Yeah. So you almost assume that the level is well, not at a level where you do complicated predictive analysis and are actually predicting business success. So how do you tackle that challenge in your own practice, where you focus on predicting business success? Well, on average, the level of analytics maturity, companies are still or often still trying to figure out the basic metrics and trying to keep track of those. So how do you cope with that difference? And you come in, you do the advanced analytics, and organizations are still at a very low level.
Yeah. So, one of the things that we've recommended in different trainings and workshops that we do is to start small. So we have this slide that we'll present sometimes in our webinars, and it talks about thinking through your organization and deciding what level of analytics are you at currently. And so level one is like you're collecting data, you're managing the data, you know that you have a lot of data coming in from the HR space. Maybe you even are aware of the other metrics being tracked outside of HR, and you're doing a good job of housing it, but that's about it. 2, 3, and 4 to 5. 4 and 5 are where you're getting to predictive, prescriptive analytics. But whenever I present that slide, I always tell folks, if you're sitting here looking at this and you think, well, gosh, we're only at level 1, it doesn't mean you have to be at level 2 and 3 before you get to being predictive. Sometimes if you just find a good partner, whether it's an external resource that you hire or someone that you find in your team that's got some of that statistical savvy that you can kind of borrow for a project, whatever that might be, if you've got data, you can find a quick win project to demonstrate the value of analytics. So a really easy one, I think, for HR is thinking about turnover. Most organizations have an employee survey where they've got data, got turnover information. Thinking about data sources that you could marry together to do a project to demonstrate the value of analytics can give you some legs behind asking for resources to move your organization forward in the analytics space, because it is a resource request. You're asking for expertise, whether it's internal hires or external vendors that you need to bring in. Oftentimes that's going to be some process and system upgrades as well. So, getting those quick win projects, finding a resource that can just pull some maybe messy data, clean it up, and do some good analytics with providing insight, that can help to get the organization moving forward down that path where it can be a challenge to go from traditional HR to a predictive analytics space around your people management. So I think those quick win projects are a good way to demonstrate that value, get folks thinking differently about what you do as an HR leader, what the possibilities are with the data that you're collecting, and thinking more strategically with where we're putting our resource dollars instead of just I think HR tends to operate as an industry on a lot of assumptions about people. Managers like to select people based on their gut. If they like them, they want to have a conversation, and then they pick the candidate that they had the best chat with. Where on the scientific side of selection, we know that that's like flipping a coin. You've got about a 50-50 shot of making a good hire if you're just going to have a manager kind of go rogue and pick the person they like. But I think that analytics is starting to challenge some of those assumptions and putting data to things. And I think that's another uphill battle is if you've got these senior level leaders that feel like they know people and they know what goes on, and people leave their boss. They don't leave because of compensation or career development. Using data to challenge those assumptions you can meet resistance. So making sure that you've got good analytics to back up when you are challenging those kind of really lived in assumptions, and demonstrating the value in terms of what are we able to predict? What does that mean in terms of dollars and cents? And speaking the language of your CFO instead of just your CHRO.
Yeah. No, that's very interesting. And the fact you mentioned assumptions and challenging them using actual science applied to organizations. One of the things that I was wondering, I was reading one of the case studies in the book, and it was about a restaurant chain that was trying to improve their bottom line performance, and they had I think three key business outcomes: the number of customers, or the number of clients, the customer satisfaction, and a third one which I forgot. The approach that you used in the book or in that specific case was to look at the relevant variables in the organizations, and specifically the engagement survey, just like you just mentioned. But you didn't use engagement as a specific variable to do that analysis. And I spoke to I think Scott was his name, your colleague, and he said, engagement, it doesn't work, and it's only effective in 30% of the cases. So how do you go about, because this is a challenge I often see when I talk to people analytic leaders. They're thinking, hey, I want to do an analysis, but which variables should and shouldn't I include? Everyone is talking about engagement, but then you don't use engagement in your analysis. So how do people who are practicing this in organizations know which variables they should include in the analysis and which they should leave out?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I wish there was a really easy answer, but I think it does depend often. We make our recommendations based on, 10 years of being in the business, and then our educational background in the space, thinking about what are the factors that we see a lot around the employee experience. That's how we talk about it, that we know to be related to outcomes. So we know that things like perceptions of leadership at multiple levels are going to be critical. If your skills are utilized well and you enjoy the work, which we talk about as job fit, we know some factors that are historically demonstrating relationships to a variety of outcomes. But you also have to be an expert in your organization. If you know that you're an organization where folks come in to build a career, then you're probably going to want to make sure that you have measures around career development and opportunities and training. If you're very team-based, you want to make sure you've got measures around how is teamwork going? Do you have the support you need? We work a lot with healthcare, and so there's always going to be factors around, do you feel like you're supported for safe patient care, providing quality? So it's a little bit of knowing just the space around the employee experience, and sometimes either research or bringing in an expert to give some recommendations is helpful. But it's also knowing your organization and what matters to the people in your organization to do their jobs well. So, there's multiple components. There's going to be some core stuff that I think works for most organizations and is going to matter no matter what industry you're in or what your size is. But then there can be some unique components as well. So it's a little bit of both. It's taking those general topics, but also making it really tailored and making sure you're capturing the factors that you think are going to matter to the people in your company.
Yeah, and I think that's an excellent point, and also one of the Google released the RE Work series with a lot of information about people analytics, and they almost always conclude with, hey, we found this, and this actually matches scientific literature that was already written 10, 15 years ago. And I think that adapting it to the specifics of the organization
Right.
I think that in the end provides the competitive value of people analytics, because everyone knows the best practices in HR, but how do you tailor make it for your organization, for your context, for your industry?
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
The other thing that I recommend with clients when they're trying to build content is, not to just theorize, but also keep your practical perspective. So, for example, on things like an employee survey, if you don't intend to do anything about compensation or flexible work arrangements or whatever it might be careful asking that on a survey because of the expectations you're going to set. So you may find in the analytics that you've asked these questions, those topics are related to your outcomes, but if you're not prepared to do market research to see if you are competitive in compensation or provide changes to that benefits package or let people work from home, be careful asking those questions because you do set up some sort of expectation when you go out and ask for feedback from your people and then put those into an analytic model. There's that scientific and theoretical approach. You want to make sure you're covering the right ground, but you also have to always be cognizant of what message are my analytics putting out to our people, and you don't want to violate that or go against what expectations you may set with your employee base as well. So there's multiple things to think about when you're building that model and thinking about just the analytics, but also you are applying this in a real world to human beings. And so you want to make sure that context is not lost in getting excited about data.
Yeah, no, that definitely sounds like someone who did a PhD and then moved away from academia to practice it in the real world. So yeah, I like that comment. So that's in your case studies, and I read that at different parts of the book, you applied structural equation modeling as a technique to analyze in the end the business impact. I have the feeling that these techniques, these multi-level modeling techniques, are becoming more and more prevalent. Can you elaborate a bit more on why you use these techniques and not the normal regression that I think most people analytics practitioners are familiar with, and I&O psychologists as well. We know our regressions, but as soon as we get to structural equation modeling, where that's seen as it's not that well known, and it's seen as quite difficult to do. Why did you opt for those techniques, and what's the benefit?
So that we always try to start any of our analytics projects from the most rigorous perspective that we can. And then things like structural equation modeling have a lot of data requirements to be able to run them, to get the model to even converge, to use a statistical term. So we want to start out there. The reason is, if you think about a regression, you are running any type of regression model assuming that the data you're putting into it is perfectly reliable and valid. You have to sort of make that assumption to run it. Now, you can do your due diligence on the front end to check that, your structure, your reliabilities, clean up your data if needed, so that you get in a place where you feel confident enough to run a regression. And that's fine. Those are still okay methods. But if you do have the opportunity to apply something like structural equation modeling, it allows you to account for so many more factors at once that it isolates those unique effects very conservatively, so that if you are finding impacts of one variable onto an outcome, you can be pretty sure that is really a cause and effect relationship, as close as you can in the behavioral sciences space. We're not in a lab, so it's never going to be perfect, but you're able to account for, the noise in your measure. So you're accounting for if it's not perfectly reliable, you're able to account for that. You're also able to look at the interrelationships among your inputs into the model, and those are going to be taken into account with that method. And you can also look at the impact on multiple outcomes at the same time. So, for example, things like turnover rates and customer satisfaction scores at the same time versus running them separately and trying to, apply your art over your science to figure out where do we want to weight these things and say that one thing's prioritized over the other. So it gives you a method to try and capture as many factors that would be in reality, so that when you do find results, they're very conservative and very accurate, Whereas in regression, you do have that piece where you've got to assume and make sure that the measures you're putting in are solid and really, holding together correctly and all that good stuff. And then you have to look at outcomes in isolation. So it's not to say that a regression approach is wrong. We certainly use regressions all the time in the work we do because not all of our data sets are going to meet the parameters required for structural equation modeling. But if you can get there, it's the most rigorous and the most accurate method for this type of data.
Yeah, so in terms of predicting using normal statistics, I would always say that there's a hierarchy. You start with your correlation, and that says nothing about directionality. Then you do your regression. You go to your multiple regression. You might even use a regression with timed variables. You get to structural equation modeling. What's next? What's the next level? As a naive question.
Well, I think a lot of the things you're talking about, you can apply to structural equation modeling. Time 1, time 2, multi-level. So are there group effects versus individual? Inputting different control variables. So all the things you think of that you can do in other statistical methods, you can roll them into SEM as well. Obviously you're limited when the more complexity you add to a model, the greater requirements to run that model in terms of basic things like computer processing speed and memory, to the amount of variance, you may have your model might become fully saturated where it can't converge. So, I think the other piece to analytics is, there's a trend towards this AI and automating things, which is very correlation based. And I find all the time in the work I do that I might find relationships that don't make sense. And I have to look at my data and my output and understand why am I finding this as a result. And using that judgment and that knowledge to understand what is truly an effect versus what's a spurious outcome. Why would something be negatively related in this model when maybe it's because it's just so highly related to another variable? So understanding that, I think, is important to applying these different methods and making sure that the predictions you're putting out there are accurate and that you can kind of stand behind them, so to speak. And I think that's another thing with HR leaders is, once we start predicting stuff, now we're on the hook for those things to happen. So if you're going to go out there as an HR leader and start saying, here's what we predict, if we move the needle on career development and work-life balance, we're going to reduce our turnover rate by 10%. Well, if I'm an HR leader and I'm going to go say that to my C-suite, I want to make sure that the methods I've used to generate that number are solid and that I've accounted for as many things as I can before I go make that prediction. So I think that's what, it underscores the need for people that understand the methods and can interpret the data appropriately and using rigorous methods and not things like correlations. Because there are so many limitations with that.
Yeah, no, especially for as the techniques you use in the studies, you took a lot of individual level variables and you tried to make the prediction to, in the end, an organizational level outcome. So I see the choice of the model because my professor a long time ago told me not to do that using regression, but that's a long time ago for me. If we're going to look towards the future, how do you see people analytics develop in the near future? What are the main challenges specifically for organizations in the next, say, 2-3 years?
I think that, this kind of hits on what I was saying before. I think that the industry is talking a lot more about analytics. I think people are starting to expect that this is going to be a component of how you make decisions in the HR space. I think just in general, in today's society, we expect things to be backed up with data because we just have so much of it in every respect. And I don't think HR is going to get a pass on that. So I think that, continuing to grow the knowledge of these methods, what's appropriate, being able to sift through the noise in this space and make sure that you're doing due diligence, whether it's building capabilities in-house and making sure you've got the appropriate resources to support that, or being able to be a good consumer of the vendor products that are out there, SMBs in that space. And so we want to make sure when we are telling our story and working with clients or potential clients that they understand what makes us different. And even if they don't end up with using SMD, that when they have the conversation with the next vendor, that they want to say, well, what is this based on? Are you just using correlations? Asking the right questions. So I think as that knowledge builds, it's going to become more and more a part of how HR is going to be expected to do business in the future.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that you refer to SMD as a vendor, and I think you're more in the consultancy and applying the custom-made consultancy solutions for organizations. What's your, correct me if I'm wrong, but as a consultant, what is your opinion on the vendors who are pushing out the ready-made products and labeling that as analytics?
I think that it makes it easy to use. It's a little more digestible for folks. I think the danger is we have yet to find, when we do analysis, even if we have the same survey that we've done with multiple clients, by and large, their results aren't always the same. So if we were to do our predictive modeling with one client and then go and say, here's what worked for client X, so it's going to work for you. We're pretty sure. Y'all are pretty similar enough. We're going to give you this model. We don't know that that's going to be true. We're not, the risk of taking something generic and saying it applies to everyone is, I think if you just think about human behavior, it's rarely going to always work for everyone. So, the more due diligence you do in using your data to predict your outcomes, the tighter your predictions are going to be, the more you can stand behind them, the more you're going to be able to demonstrate value. So, the pro to those vendors that say, here's this solution, we've validated it, it's going to work for you, is that it might, and it's easy to adjust, it's ready to go, it's probably cheaper, but you also run the risk of it being wrong and making a wrong prediction and putting money towards something that may not actually drive your outcome.
Very interesting. Very interesting to get your perspective on that, and to split that vendor category in the actual software vendors and the consulting, the custom-made solutions. And I agree with what you're saying. Hannah Spell, thank you very much. If people are interested in the book Predicting Business Success, where can they find it?
So SHRM published it, but you can find it on Amazon. You Google it on Amazon, look at it, search for it on Amazon. It's there. You can buy it. It's put out by SHRM, shrm.org. Can link you there as well. So it should be easy to find. We hope people do go out and look for the book and find it to be useful. We put a lot of what we did into that book and tried to make it really practical for folks to educate themselves in this space and understand when they are trying to make a decision of moving forward with analytics, having some good resources and information to make good decisions in that space.
As I said, I read the book and I thoroughly enjoyed it, and especially the use of more advanced techniques to start at the individual drivers and really relate it to the business outcomes. So that's I can recommend it. Hannah Spell, thank you very, very much, and have a very good day.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great.
Absolutely, thank you very much.